In a world where speed and power dictate supremacy, one machine emerged from the heart of Britain to challenge the status quo. Born from a legacy of innovation and a quest for performance, it carved its path against the backdrop of revolution in two-wheeled engineering. With a roar that echoed the dawn of a new era in motorcycling, it brought together the best of tradition and cutting-edge tech. As the tarmac trembled beneath its wheels, it wasn't just riding on asphalt. It was riding on the aspirations of a generation seeking the ultimate two-wheeled thrill. With a distinctive symphony of power bellowing from its three-cylinder heart, it stood as a testament to what happens when innovation meets passion. But tragically, this was cut short. This isn't just a tale of metal, rubber, and gasoline. It's a tale of a motorcycle legend that redefined the boundaries. Prepare to be captivated by the iconic and truly unique Triumph Trident T150 and its rather tumultuous history. The late 1960s were a pivotal time for motorcycle manufacturers. Triumph, a mark synonymous with speed and reliability for years, faced an existential crisis from the East. Japanese manufacturers were flooding the market with advanced, high-performance machines that threatened the dominance of European brands. The landscape was changing, and Triumph's response to this new wave of innovation was to be the creation of the Trident T150, a machine that not only aimed to secure Triumph's place in this high-stakes race, but to also push the boundaries of what was possible. The Trident T150 was Triumph's bold answer to the rising dominance of multi-cylinder bikes, particularly those from Japan. The Honda CB750 would come out around the same time, which will go down in history as essentially the first superbike, even though the T150 beat it to market by a couple weeks, where the CB750 itself introduced to the world the concept of a four-cylinder superbike, with an electric starter, disc brakes, and refined reliability. The T150, though, countered with its distinct all-new three-cylinder engine, offering a blend of power, torque, and a new signature exhaust note that could only come from a British triple. But what if I told you that the T150 Triumph itself technically was the world's first superbike? See, the radical idea in terms of the Triumph's three-cylinder engine was actually already in the drawing board around 1962, which was years before the release of the bike itself. And after a few more years of development, Triumph actually had their first working engine ready in 1965. Which you would think made them poised to release the T150, which would sport that new engine, within the year. But things would not end up going to plan. And the reason for that was the relationship between Triumph and BSA, which was Triumph's parent company at the time. This was a tale of corporate inefficiency as old as time. Basically, the engine was ready to go, and it shouldn't have taken Triumph too long to get an actual prototype motorcycle out to show and begin generating positive press with, and even have a production version ready shortly after. But you have to think about it this way. Now, BSA and Triumph would kind of operate in a way similar to Chevy and Pontiac. They were separate manufacturers that would build their own creations based off the same core platforms. But for what would become the T150, BSA wanted their own bike to be much more different than just a rebadged Triumph. They insisted, or should I say, forced the hand of Triumph to help create a new version of the three-cylinder for the BSA bike specifically, which would have an entirely different engine block, but maintain the exact same core internals, which in reality was just a colossal waste of resources. Oh, and BSA, to add insult to injury, also wanted an entirely new frame to be engineered for their version of the bike as well. But wait, BSA's utter lack of common sense somehow got even worse. See, the 60s were a hot time for Triumph. Their brand equity was at a peak, and bikers around the globe were enthralled by the well-respected manufacturer. BSA knew this, of course, but then decided to redesign the look of the upcoming T150 because they thought it needed to look so much different from everything else that was already selling well for Triumph, which is just crazy. So they did the most logical step for any motorcycle manufacturer, and that was they hired a design studio that had never worked on a motorcycle before. And the end result was a T150 that looked very square, and pretty bland if we're being honest. So while the T150 itself could have been ready by 65 or 66, BSA spent nearly 2 more years drawing out this process and ending up making a bike that was realistically worse off than the first go-around. If the T150 had hit the market in 65 with that radical new 3-cylinder and distinctly Triumph design that it should have had, it would have undoubtedly been a hugely successful bike. But as BSA twiddled their thumbs and pretty much did everything possible to derail a speedy release of this bike, and it ended up hurting them greatly. By the time 1968 rolled around, the Honda CB750 4-cylinder had just come out, and this really stole most of the wind under the sails of the T150s. The CB750 was, just by all intents and purposes, a better bike that was better styled and more practical. If Triumph had launched a few years earlier with better styling, though, this certainly wouldn't have been the case, but it was the harsh reality of the marketplace even at the time. And for the T150, even with its lovely 740cc, 58 horsepower triple that sounded pretty much unlike anything else on the road, it just wasn't enough. The T150's engine had a 67mm bore and a 70mm stroke, and the engine ran at a 9.5:1 compression ratio. This was all topped off with 3 27mm carburetors and was ran through a 4-speed gearbox at launch, which was then upgraded to a 5-speed later on. The initial T150s featured drum brakes up front and in the rear, and they tipped the scales with a dry weight of 468 pounds. On the performance side, there was no denying the T150 was quick, with a top speed of 117 and a quarter-mile time of 13.7 seconds at 98 miles per hour, per Cycle World's testing. The T150 was a very solid bike, but this new design shot it in the foot, specifically in its US sales, which was undoubtedly the biggest market for Triumph. They hastily worked to design and offer a conversion kit for the bike to change the look into something more traditional, which finally hit the market in 1970, which people loved, but it was 2 years after the bike had already came out. And journalists alike also did really like the Triumph as well. They said it handled well and it was plenty fast for the period. But the other elephant in the room was the price. This was not a cheap bike. In fact, it was rather expensive at about $1,800 MSRP, which made it more expensive than the better equipped and on paper faster Honda. On the racing circuits, though, these Triumphs were very solid bikes. In fact, we would go down and say they were absolutely fantastic. From 71 to 75, the Triumph triple race bikes won at the infamous Isle of Man TT every single year for 5 consecutive years. By 72, Triumph had fixed the styling of the T150 with the newly launched conversion kits. But it was too little, too late, because by this time, the poor decisions of BSA started to catch up with them. Production of the BSA version of the T150 ceased shortly after, and sales limped along for the Triumph T150. The T150, though, did get some midlife upgrades, such as a front disc brake and a 5-speed gearbox, but it remained mostly the same. By 1974, the T150 was refreshed with the T160 to meet new US regulations, and it also saw the full return to the classic Triumph style. There was no boxy styling on these ones. These also proved to be a fairly slow seller, and by 75, the T150 and T160s were gone. At this time, a new consolidation of British motorcycle companies was happening between Norton, BSA, and Triumph, which caused a whole slew of turmoil, a strike, and a closing at the Triumph factory, along with a bunch of other drama that is far too vast to get into at this point. But if you want to see another video on that whole debacle, leave a comment down below. But in essence, the Triumph T150 was the ultimate story of company bean counters truly ruining the chances of success for an otherwise great product. With 27,000 Triumph Tridents built and just under 6,000 of the BSA versions built from 68 to 75, they clearly were not a major sales success. But they are very important and pretty historically significant, as they are the first mass-produced triple ever made. And these bikes do have an impressive cult following behind them all these years later, even though in period, the excitement of the CB750 kind of swept them under the rug. But now, years later, I think we all have to agree these T150s just have a cool factor that is undeniable and not even present in the CB750. If you enjoyed this video, we would greatly appreciate it if you could drop a like and also share this video with other enthusiasts. Also, please make sure that you are subscribed to the Rare Motorcycles YouTube channel and smash that notification bell for more documentary-style videos just like this on the world's most interesting motorcycles. Until next time, enthusiasts.